Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate your patience through those minor technical difficulties that we had. Welcome to another LinkedIn Live session brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader, and Optiv Clearhouse, the federal powerhouse working to secure greatness. Really appreciate you all being with us. I am Jessica Hetrick, the VP and Head of Services at Optiv ClearShark. I am joined by two of my very esteemed colleagues to discuss a very important topic today, and that is zero trust. I will be moderating today's discussion. Thank you all for joining. Please make sure that you drop any questions that you might have into the chat section. We'll do our best to capture some Q&A at the end, but we host these sessions because we want to hear from you. We do these live, we deal with the technical difficulties, all because we want to make sure that we're interacting with you all as much as we possibly can. Today, our two very esteemed experts will be sharing why it's important to have an effective zero trust strategy, what to look for in your zero trust journey, and how to develop a strategic approach. With that, speaking of my experts, I'd like to introduce Mark Motaset, our Senior Director for Zero Trust Strategy at Optiv ClearShark, with decades of experience in helping enterprises establish healthy and mature security programs, and Brent Hansen, our VP of Federal Sales Engineering at Optiv ClearShark, and a zero trust practitioner with over 25 years of experience in security, data encryption, cloud native, zero trust, and API strategies. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Jessica.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to be obviously mindful of time. I know you all are joining us a little bit late here. So Mark, I'm going to start with you as our Senior Director for Zero Trust Strategy. Current state of the state when it comes to zero trust. Is it just a buzzword? Are we thinking it's just a buzzword? Or are we reverting back to that? Give me your take.
Right. So my answer is no. No, I'm
Okay.
just kidding. Zero trust has been around for way too long and is part of too many mandates to be just a buzzword. It's a culmination of many best practices like defense in depth and least privilege. And with the help of modern technology, the concepts are starting to take form in terms of solutions. And something to keep in mind is that no two zero trust implementations are the same. Each implementation can be different, but will always include integration, analytics, and automation. And those are to ensure zero trust core principles are always applied to improve resilience, speed up response, and reduce risk to tolerable levels. A nice side effect of zero trust is that it forced the tech industry to take the zero trust guidance and make it achievable through solutions offered today. Through innovation and some creativity, security professionals have the ability to integrate tools and achieve, the desired outcome that they're looking for. Zero trust gives security professionals defined goals that they can base their strategy on as they work towards modernization and risk reduction and take on the specific capabilities of each of the zero trust pillars to meet the challenges of the day and to reduce impact of an unplanned event. That's my long-winded no.
Excellent. Brent, in terms of recent events, do you think zero trust would make a difference? I think a lot of organizations are like, zero trust is a concept, but does it make a difference?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And it's a resounding yes. Just based on the last 45 days, we've had some significant data compromises come to bear. One of them being the 2.7 billion password file that was leaked on the dark web. And then, of course, the follow-up breach of the millions and millions of social security numbers and the addresses as well. And unfortunately, we all bear the burden of these data compromises. Now, whether they come from the outside in, whether it's from the inside out, or it was truly an insider threat. And that's truly what zero trust is all about. And if I can quote Benjamin Franklin, one of my favorite phrases is, 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. And that's really what zero trust is really about. And when you look at these most recent data compromises, was it simply unencrypted data at rest? Was it compromised administrative credentials? Was it lack of multi-factor authentication to the access to these data and these application systems? Was it a default password? Was it a service account that wasn't changed? Was it a successful phishing campaign? All of these have a reoccurring theme, which is I break in the network, I'll find ways to elevate my credentials, and then I'll exfiltrate the data. And that continues to unfortunately happen over and over. So to your question around zero trust, would it make a difference with some of the recent events that had happened? It's just a resounding yes, because each of these controls are required under zero trust guidelines. And it's likely that each person listening today just this summer has received one of those letters stating that your information has been compromised. And then, of course, you get the follow-up actions of locking your credit and having a year free subscription to XYZ. But it's unfortunate that these type of events continue to happen. And with zero trust, these guidelines, these principles, these are to ensure that you're already assuming compromise. You're assuming that someone's inside the network already. And having these type of controls, the capabilities, these can truly protect you, again, whether it's outside in, inside out. And again, now with these recent compromises, we're talking passwords, SSNs. If you're using the same username and a password, or I should say same password as your home accounts, as you're using for work, as finance, there's a lot of really, there's just a lot of data out there that can now be used against us in more follow-up attempts and data compromises, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I'd like to stick with you on a thought here. So as we talk about the risks that have been taking place, it seems like a very important pillar with zero trust is how are we buying down risk? How do we effectively measure the risk of not implementing a zero trust strategy? And so my question to you is, how do we actually start to approach this from that, call it the bigger conversation that boards and executives are constantly worrying about, where cybersecurity is a pillar of buying down risk and supporting and protecting an organization? How do we effectively measure that?
Yeah, great question. And Mark and I have talked about this many times. And risk is really measuring, or it should be measured by multiplying the likelihood times impact. And we have to assume breach in a modern day world. And that's really the core foundation of zero trust. And that constitutes a change in the way that we address and the way that we go after our own personal agency risk. And because the event has happened or it's happening, the already measured likelihood is high, and the impact, of course, is substantial. And that's where we have to really prioritize and concentrate our efforts. And to reduce risk to just the tolerable levels, we absolutely have to place the controls as close to the asset that we're trying to protect as possible. So, one example very quickly is just microsegmentation and being able to take the entity that needs access as closest as possible to the protected asset itself. And then, of course, masking everything else so that, again, it's least privilege and I'm only able to access what I'm supposed to, and I have the appropriate controls and the access that I should when it's about accessing these type of systems. And gosh, another benefit is really the efficiencies that zero trust even provides internally to our administrators. And oftentimes it's really gluing, it's a concatenation of all of these controls to the original credentials, the administrative credentials, the privileged accounts, it's the endpoints, it's the network, the controls, and then providing this elaborate orchestration to really automate processes of how you onboard new employees, how you provide access to privileged data when needed, especially for mission. And all of these things add together and help really reduce that operational risk that we have. And of course, reducing the amount of human interaction that's needed, because unfortunately, we're up against a resounding task when it comes to the hackers, the nation states. I mean, we're at risk every second of the day. And we have to continue to focus on zero trust principles and guidelines, and they will continuously improve your security posture.
So Mark,
yeah.
I was gonna say, Mark, take that a step further, Mark. Define for us what Brent just started to get into, define for us how you approach that.
Yeah, you see how excited I am about that. Yeah, just to add on to what Brent said, and this isn't necessarily a risk measurement, but a way to think about risk mitigation in terms of zero trust. The NSTAC, or the National Security Telecommunication Advisory Committee, which is part of CISA, developed this 5-step process that talks about how to think about use cases for zero trust. And those 5 steps are: start with define the protect surface, map transaction flows, build a zero trust architecture, create a zero trust policy, you know, the who, what, where, why, and how, that Kipling, leveraging that Kipling model, and then monitor and maintain the network. And this is a great way to kind of get to the root of how are we applying controls for the entity that wants access to a target that we're trying to protect, and what are all the different controls that we've got in between those two things, those two entities that we can leverage to protect it and reduce risk.
Awesome. So I'd like to stick with you, Mark, as we go into this kind of next question. Talk to me a little bit about how do you start? Clients sometimes zero trust is such a big concept. So how do we help clients, or how do clients begin the journey in this? Where do they start? What's the biggest struggle that they're facing, and how do they work to overcome that?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, a lot of our clients are really struggle with the basics. You know, they don't have an inventory of, for instance, your users or their critical assets. They don't have a great strategy for remote access, or they're permitting too much access for their third parties and contractors who may need access into their network. And they may not even know what the risk status of those third parties are. You know, they might not even be measuring that. Most organizations are struggling with that, where to start. So many organizations have taken some steps to modernize controls, and that's usually at the endpoint. And that means something like they've implemented some agents to do some antivirus. They've turned on the host firewall, or maybe they've got some intrusion detection turned on at the endpoint. But I'll argue that those controls, the security tools, are many times operating in a siloed fashion, and they're lacking integration. So you may be collecting information about that endpoint somewhere on the network on that device, but we're not integrating the capabilities of that firewall and the logging into some central place so that we can really look and see what's occurring at the endpoint. We must also consider, our legacy tools and limitations and compatibility issues. And this goes back and forth between legacy security tools with modern security or business approaches, and vice versa, modern security tools and legacy, business systems. And this could lead to barriers in integration. And a major consideration in implementing a zero trust approach is to start integrating controls to produce that contextual output to help us make informed decisions about what actions to take. And then another point that's related here is that if we had more rigor in our security program management and in risk management, which is that basics part that you'll hear me talk a lot about, we wouldn't struggle as much with knowing where to start. Because we know where our risk is. We know we've got that business alignment. We know what the business or what the mission is doing with these modern approaches. And then talking about starting timelines, let's not forget about the latest letter released on July 10th, from the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, requiring that agencies do 2 things by the 10th of November of this year: submit an updated zero trust implementation plan for all their information systems, and they must document current and target maturity levels in each pillar for all their high value assets and high impact systems. So they've got kind of a little bit of work to do. And if they're not started, it'd be important, I think, to reach out and get some help with that.
Yeah.
Brent, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're working against those deadlines and you look at the vast places that our infrastructure exists and some of that aging infrastructure, and one of the complicated environments that we've seen is really trying to protect that IoT OT, as you may understand it to be somewhat vulnerable and really not built for security. That's not the purpose of a lot of these devices. And because of that realization that aging infrastructure and really anything behind SCADA, again, it's not built for security. It's not equipped with modern capabilities that you can just retrofit security. So when there were mandates around encrypting data at rest and like, I don't know where my data's at, and now that you've got where the data's at and you've labeled it, you've assetted it, you're able to prioritize high value system of record. You're able to go in and really retrofit because those are more modern day system and architectures. But when it comes to IoT, OT, it's a really difficult thing to retrofit something that doesn't quite accept agents. It doesn't accept other additional technologies on top of what these particular devices do and what they're responsible for. And what I think as well is that because of this, the business, the mission, they want to have optics. They want to have visibility into what's happening behind that SCADA. They want to know where they're vulnerable, what's patched, what has default passwords. Again, as Mark was alluding to around just the inventory of what you've got, and providing, again, the access to that represents a vulnerability to itself. Anytime you have to open up a connection between device A and B, you're opening up a potential vulnerability IP address or whatever that may be, whether you're using an old school VPN or modern day. You need to find ways to secure, but also provide that visibility. And it can be very challenging, but there are capabilities, there are products, there are partners such as ourselves that are out there helping evangelize, helping architect for that modern day approach and strategy to take zero trust principles and really apply it to some of that infrastructure that just wasn't made, and nor can it really consume what's needed for some of the optics that's needed. So it's very difficult, but it can be part of your fabric. There are capabilities today that can help you do that.
I want to dig into the approach concept that you just hit on, Brent. There's an important note there, right? We have to formulate structure around what that approach is, right? Doing it willy-nilly, like you guys are talking about, there's so much in our environments that we can't take an unstructured approach. In fact, I would argue that the only way to approach zero trust is in a structured manner. So how do we deliberately implement a zero trust approach to then be able to define a strategy and subsequently implement the appropriate controls aligned to zero trust? Mark, I'll start with you here. Assuming breach from the onset, what's your structured approach? What do you recommend here?
Yeah, this is a frequent question, and it's one of the reasons why I developed an approach called PLAN. It's an acronym, but it's more comprehensive than the Instack 5-step process that I mentioned a moment ago, and it's an example of the value that Optic ClearShark brings to the table. It's our 4-step process consisting of prepare, layout, action, and nurture. And you can see a view here being put up. It helps decompose zero trust implementation into bite-sized chunks. So for instance, in the first stage, prepare, PLAN lays out the things required to be successful in your zero trust implementation. The steps that I lay out for getting your application, user, and endpoint inventories in order, for instance, like I mentioned previously. Another area where I see organizations suffer comes from the security program capability centered on mission or business alignment. We can avoid cultural hurdles through education, communication, and transparency just by communicating. Outreach to our business and mission leads is a critical success factor, but it's one that historically security professionals haven't been very good at because it focuses on the need for us to operate at that layer 8. We've got to talk to people, we've got to reach out, and we've got to collaborate. But staying aligned with our peers who are operating the business and mission helps us collect much needed context to be aware of those changes in the way of our organization conducting business or executing the mission. It may also give us the opportunity to communicate our plans and reason for security related changes, to open a dialogue about those changes to avoid cultural barriers. And sometimes, you may have a business unit that will push back on a security change or something like that. If you're communicating up front, you're going to be more successful. But there's plenty there in that in that approach that I've developed to get you started. And I'm happy to share more about that with anyone who wants to learn more. Just reach out.
Brent, anything to add from your perspective, sir?
No, I would add that, with Mark and the plan, it's really about you don't have to change the tire while you're driving down the road. There are times where you have to slow down to go faster. And that's where you spend the time in the cycles to really evaluate where's the starting point on where we're at. And surprisingly enough, the prospect of actually being further along in the zero trust journey than you actually are is very, very true. There's a lot of capabilities and tools that are out there. They're integrated into your fabric that you're already using, but it's a matter of being able to measure that. Where are we today? And where do we aspire to be? How do we measure the trajectory based on the pillars? And how do we ensure that we're paying attention to the details? We're ensuring that each individual, whether it's a federal employee, whether it's a contractor, a vendor, a partner, how do we ensure that they are all 100% stewards of data security, of security principles, and to ensure that they're all acting on behalf of all of us taxpayers? And it's really culture, and culture drives behavior. So it's not just the tools, but it's the people, it's the process, and those things along with plan can help you measure where you're at, where you aspire to be, and how you can effectively measure the progress as you go along the zero trust journey.
Awesome. Okay, final major question before we address anything further, guys. When we are looking at application in the current events, issues with MFA, executive orders, Mark, I think you mentioned earlier the July release from OMB tied to the requirements around the zero trust journey. How should we be protecting ourselves? Brent, start with you.
Yeah, great question. And we continue to learn from lessons of the past. And one of those just most recently was not using MFA for access to a Snowflake environment. And again, it's all in the details. Multi-factor authentication has been around for a very, very long time. But again, you don't know what you don't know. So until you do the assessment in the inventory of the users, the creds, the accounts, does everyone who still works for your agency, or more importantly, does not work there, have their accounts been deactivated? Everything they had access to, like, have you done the due diligence, again, to slow down, to go faster, to ensure that those type of details that you've checked every box, you've measured twice, you've cut once, those are simple things, but again, in practice of very large ecosystems and infrastructures that span multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, perhaps remote locations, I mean, it's a daunting task, but again, you have to have an evaluation process of where you're at, but then again, effectively measure the trajectory of how you go forward. Maybe sometimes you're taking one step backwards, but always have, one foot in the other with sticking to the plan, enforcing the culture to drive that behavior to move forward.
Thanks, Brent. Mark, anything from your perspective, sir?
Yeah, just one thing. It's hard to believe that MFA is a 2-decade-old control. It just blows my mind. But just to address the low-hanging fruit here, things like MFA, SSO, application portal, we should be looking for ways to reduce the attack surface and even addressing, for instance, your network access approach. Leveraging a software-defined network to retire your old VPN approach is a great way to move forward from a risk reduction perspective. That also help who has access to your network, who's sitting on your network, and it just really helps shrink that blast radius. Look for securing your east, west, north, south access through microsegmentation. And you can sprinkle some attribute-based access controls to help minimize the attack surface as well. But continue to assess your risk, and just be thinking about the basics, because the basics are still important. How do you incorporate zero trust into your policies and standards and your procedures and all of that? But I would also say that if all else fails, freeze your credit.
So just a few things, and then that last one, right?
Yeah.
Right. Just a few things.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
absolutely.
thank you both for the incredibly insightful conversation today. I'm sure that people have a ton of questions. Of course, anytime anybody has a question, please feel free to reach out. I thank everyone for joining us. I hope this conversation was beneficial. Mark, Brent, as always, thank you for your expertise, your knowledge, your insight, and really look forward to the next Octave ClearShark LinkedIn Live.